Yeah, kia ora again to everybody out there in the world. Firstly, my name is Scott Matheson. I am the co-founder and owner of Working in New Zealand. I have a couple of people with me today, Nassim and Paul. I'll introduce to you shortly. And I guess first things I just would like to express our condolences to everybody who's out there who's suffering from COVID. And down here, we obviously don't have COVID in the community, but we're very aware that a lot of the world is in lockdown, and we just want to express our sympathies and also give you all a boost and say, hey, listen, it's Christmas soon, and hopefully you'll be out of that stage soon. In terms of this webinar, we normally get hundreds of questions. Because we're in a very short time frame, we're not going to be answering them in real time, but we will endeavour to answer them later. And I guess part of the reason around that is that for some people who are on this webinar now, it's the first time you've even thought about migrating. Maybe it's the first time you've even thought about New Zealand. But for others, we know that there's people who are ready to go, who have already started their process, or have been out here, or have relatives or parents or whatever it might be who are here and they're ready to press the button. So everyone's at a different stage, but there is an opportunity to have a consultation. We're very much about talking to you individually, bespoking a program for you, and making sure it's just right for you. I think the other thing I want to mention is that most people who come to New Zealand are highly satisfied with their migration outcome. There's been multiple surveys done by us and by the government, and it's always around 90% of people are really, really happy, very satisfied, or extremely satisfied with their move. But there's always a small number of people who aren't, and what we find is that those people, probably their expectations haven't been met, and normally that's because they haven't done their research, or they've got problems where in their home country, and they're bringing their problems to New Zealand, and the problems don't go away, they follow them. So I just want to emphasize that today is really about learning, it's really about information, it's really about encouraging you all to learn as much as you possibly can, because migrating is one of the biggest things that you can do in your life. For most people, it's permanent. You're moving from one country to another, and you really want to make a very well-informed decision. So this is about information, okay? So first, anyway, I'd just like to make some introductions. My first panelist is based in Auckland, Nassim Lalazari. She's been at Working In for over 10 years. Nassim, can I ask you to say a few words, please?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Nassim. I'm originally from Australia. I'm one of the few that's migrated this way, the opposite way across the ditch, and have chosen to make New Zealand my home. As Scott's mentioned, it's a great move, and when you're settled, you love it and you never want to leave. So originally from Australia, I studied law in Sydney, and I moved over to New Zealand with my Kiwi husband and children. So I've been with Working In for quite a few years now, and over that time I've done thousands of applications for all sorts of migrants from all parts of the world.
Thanks, Nassim. I always love it when I hear an Australian saying that they love New Zealand. We're quite competitive with the Australians, of course, but they never want to admit that New Zealand's better than them. Just a little bit of bias here. Thanks, Nassim. Our next panelist is Paul Goddard. We've worked with Paul for well over a decade. He's based in Stratford-upon-Avon in the lovely UK, but has lived in New Zealand for many years. Paul, can I ask you to say a few words and introduce yourself?
Yeah, Scott, look, great to see you all. Yeah, I am currently over here in the UK. We'll head back to New Zealand at some point, just over here right now. It's a good place for me to be from, because there's a lot of people in the UK who want to leave at the moment with everything that's going on, and other countries around the world. I think we're seeing that spike. But I moved to New Zealand back in 2002, 2003. Something like that. Lived in New Zealand for 17 years up until very recently. Been there and got the t-shirt, as they say, or the all black shirt. And my kids grew up in New Zealand. My grandson was born in New Zealand. So it's a very special place. It was a place that I didn't know a lot about when I moved there. But living there, experiencing that whole lifestyle balance has been the best thing. we ever did as a family. And as Scott said, I'm definitely in that 90% of people who were extremely satisfied with New Zealand, and that's always going to be the case. And that's why it's a pleasure to be helping people now, like everyone who's on here.
Thanks, Paul. You didn't actually mention what preempted you to move. Were you on some TV show?
Yeah, it was before Wanted Down Under and all these other BBC TV shows. The BBC did a TV series called Get a New Life, and we were the family that they picked to basically move to New Zealand. So we had 2 months with a film crew following us around and filmed us in the UK, filmed us in New Zealand, and then they did a follow-up show 6 months later, and then I wrote a book all about it and got that published. So it was, yeah, my move was very different to most people. And I wouldn't advise moving that way, by the way, but definitely do it the way that I tell you to do it now, not in the way I did it.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think the BBC is going to be following everybody who migrates to New Zealand, right? No. Great. Yeah, and just a little bit about myself. As I said before, I'm a co-founder of Working In's been running for 20 years. We've our history really was on exhibitions, so we ran expos throughout the world, where we would bring employers from New Zealand and Australia up to the UK, over to South Africa, to Canada, Spain, Australia, and we'd go to places like Earl's Court in London, have thousands of people come through the doors to find out about migrating. About 5 years ago, we changed our model to this online model, so well before COVID, because we just felt that we could be a lot more targeted with each individual. And of course, there's a lot of cost in flying across the world and a whole lot of environmental impact as well. So what we do now is basically tailor programs for each individual and make sure that their move to New Zealand is as smooth as possible, because there are a lot of fishhooks along the way. So collectively, between the three panelists, we've got over 50 years experience specifically in helping people move to New Zealand. We're not fly-by-nighters or flash in the pan. We've been here a long time. We're going to stay here for a long time. We love what we do. We're quite passionate about that. We're very passionate about it. That's why I'm still here doing what I do as the founder and owner. I don't need to be here, but I enjoy it. So just a little bit of an update on what's happening here in New Zealand. As I mentioned before, our borders are closed, but that doesn't mean they're closed. It means that there's a restricted entry. We have no COVID in the community. There are people with COVID who are in managed isolation. We call it MIQ, managed isolation quarantine. So about 3,000 people a week are coming into New Zealand, mainly New Zealand citizens or residents, but about 10% of those people are on visas. So we have what's called border restrictions, which we'll go into, and the scene will detail that out. But it means that some people are allowed through the border, and just depending on their skill set, depending on their work visa, and what we're seeing is that it is loosening day by day or week by week. So there's very much opportunities here in New Zealand, and I think the other thing is that what COVID has brought is a massive demand on skills. New Zealand has always relied on skilled migration. Now the borders have been shut for such a long time that there's incredible pressures on businesses throughout the country who don't have the skills to get stuff done. New Zealanders can't fulfill the roles for a lot of the work that's required. So this is a big part of what we'll be talking about today. So I guess my final comment is it will take longer than normal to move to New Zealand because of these circumstances, but life's a long time. It's worth hanging in there, and it's worth getting in there quickly, as soon, and be in front of the queue, because the demand for this country is higher than it's ever been. So let's get into the guts, if you like, of this webinar. And so really, you as a person that's interested in moving to New Zealand can understand the process. In New Zealand, to get a visa, you need a job. To get the job, you need a visa. There's this thing that we call the catch-22. Paul, you're probably best to describe this. I know that you do this quite well. Can you just give people an update on that specific quandary and how they can potentially get around it?
Yeah, the catch-22 is the one main barrier that people really come across. If you've done any kind of research into can you move to New Zealand, you'll pretty quickly work out that you are, 99% likely to need a job offer to be able to move to New Zealand as a skilled person. And immediately, if you start looking online for jobs, you'll see that it says you need a visa to apply for this role or something similar. Even if it doesn't, and you do apply for the roles, you'll probably get no response at all from an employer. And the reason that the catch-22 basically exists is it's the barriers that are stopping the employer moving forward. And those barriers are the things that your CV can't tell them. And that's basically, will you get a visa? Can you get a visa? When will you get the visa? How long is it going to take? When will you get here? When can you start work? As an employer, what do I need to do so that you can get a visa? Your CV doesn't tell them any of that. All your CV tells them is that you can do the job, but you're overseas. And if you're not removing that barrier, then the catch-22 is a massive, massive hurdle that most people don't know how to get around. And most people's experience of trying to move to New Zealand is applying for jobs online for months and months on end, getting nowhere, and then giving up, and that's it. But it exists because the employers need to know that if they are going to offer you a job, it's all going to be okay.
Yeah, it's a bit of a quandary, and I can imagine it as a New Zealand employer. You receive a CV from somebody overseas, you actually need that position fulfilled now. There's someone who's overseas, you can't interview them, you can't bring them in for an interview or face-to-face. And then even if you do get to that point where you're going, well, this person's actually perfect, then they've got to apply for a visa. There's a lot of unknowns whether they'll actually get the visa, whether there's health or medical issues, and how long that's going to take. So there's a lot of education, isn't there, Paul, around that?
Absolutely. It's I've sat in offices, as you have, Scott, with employers, and it's literally they've got a pile of CVs on their desk and they go through them, and I've seen them literally get the ones from offshore, and if they haven't thrown them in the bin, they've put them right at the bottom of the pile in case they're desperate. And you don't want to be at the bottom of the pile. Well,
so how do you get a job, mate? How does that work?
Yeah, look, again, this is something that we focus on a lot, because the job offer is the key to getting the role. And as I touched on before, getting a job is all about removing the barriers for the employer. So basically, you need to be able to put yourself in a position where you are being presented to employers as somebody who is skilled, eligible, ready to move, has support around them. And the employer has to be reassured that all they need to do is offer you a job. And if they offer you a job, the employer has also got access to some help and support as well, because there's changes to immigration policy that are coming in next year that Nazim will touch on, I'm sure. And, if you're researching the internet at the moment and you're looking at things how they are, it's changing. The research that you're doing is almost going to be a bit of a waste of time, because it's probably not going to apply to you, or something different's going to apply to you. And so what we do is help you get the job offer by putting an employment strategy in place that removes the barriers between you and the employer. And there's all sorts of aspects to that. There's the online jobs, there's recruitment agencies, and obviously that's where we come in. There's the hidden job market. There's possible trips to New Zealand once COVID borders exist to get a job. And these are all strategies where actually we can add benefit and support. And if you're doing that and you're removing the barrier for the employer and you're presenting yourself in the best way possible, in other words, you're not just a CV in a pile of CVs, then that's the way to put yourself in the best position to get a job offer in New Zealand.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It all makes sense to me, and you're absolutely right about immigration changes. And I'm going to ask Nazim just to update that for us. But obviously, there's a lot of disruption in the world right now, and in the UK, you've got Brexit, and obviously in the US, a change of the presidency, and our immigration laws are going through an upheaval. And next year, we'll see the biggest change in skilled migration policy for over 20 years. So, yep. There is a lot of change happening, and maybe Nazim, you can talk to us just a little bit about that visa and what are the visa categories if someone's sitting over there in South Africa or Canada or wherever they may be. How do they get that visa, and what kind of visas are available? Nazim.
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, obviously, we know the borders are closed. So we can apply for a border exemption for certain occupations and people with specific skills. So if you fit into that category, we would be applying for a border exemption under the critical requirements. Apart from the critical requirements and the border exemptions, I guess the normal visas that most people would apply for is normally a temporary visa first, and then also residence either afterwards or concurrently, depending on the policy. So with every work visa, other than those under the family category, you need to have a job offer. So a lot of what we end up doing is talking to employers about what they might need to change in a job offer, how we can support them and ensure that that whole visa process is as smooth as possible. You don't want to have the lots of back and forth with Immigration New Zealand questioning, for example, what seems like a benign line in an IEA or your employment agreement, but they're just wanting to make sure that that's removed or updated to meet current employment law as well as immigration policy. So I guess the standard way is to work with an advisor and make sure that they're assisting you through that process, particularly with the work visa. That's the temporary visa. What's important with that process is that if you can get that bit right, the residence becomes easier down the line. That sets you up, and it's like your first, I guess, introduction to Immigration New Zealand. Sometimes that's the first time that they have a record of you. So you want that to be all correct so that you can rely on what's built in that application with the future application as well. Did you want me to talk a little bit more about the border exemptions at the moment, Scott?
I think we'll come to the border exemptions, but just to sort of paraphrase what you're saying is that the first visa that you get is a essential work visa, and that's related to your job offer, correct?
Oh.
Yep. And then after that, you can apply for a residency visa, correct?
Yep.
And there's two categories though, eh? Can you explain those categories? Because there's two pathways for residency, isn't there?
Yeah, so with the temporary visas, the majority of people will get a work visa under the essential skills policy. And then for some, they might get a visa called the work to residence. So the work to residence category requires that you either have an accredited employer with Immigration New Zealand, and that's a process that employers have to go through. And then you have to be offered a job that meets specific criteria and a minimum base wage and things like that. And then the other one is the long-term skills shortage. So that's very, very specific. And a lot of people would need their qualifications assessed in order to meet that criteria. But if you're on a work to residence visa, after 2 years of being in that role with that employer, you can apply for residence from work. Everybody else that would be on an essential skills visa would apply for residence under the skilled migrant category. Now, in the past, we had people who were on a work to residence visa and was like, oh, I'm not waiting 2 years to apply for my residence. So they would prepare their residence application under the skilled migrant category and submit that and get their residence sooner than the 2 years. So you can jump between some of the policies. We'd always just work out what works best for you in your situation based on your job offer and your personal circumstances.
Yeah, and we kind of call the skilled migrant category the point system, because at the moment you've got to get 160 points, right? But we feel as though that's going to be going up quite soon. Correct? Fair enough?
That's correct. So lots of you out there might be aware that the Immigration New Zealand is accepting expressions of interest. So they're happy to take your money. But at the moment, they're not drawing anyone from the pool in order to apply for residence. And part of the reason for that is that whenever there's any big change around the world, so it happened the last time there was a GFC, and now this time with COVID, a lot of people feel unsettled. So the number of applications increases. And with that increase, it meant that they have a huge pipeline of applications and they're trying to sort through them. And so what they're doing is they've put it on hold so they can go through the applications they have on hand. And when they re-release it, we've been told that the points required are going to likely be higher and the way that they allocate them. So this feeds into, I think, Scott, you were mentioning earlier on in the piece about how Immigration New Zealand is going to want to get the best of the best migrants out there. And because there's more increased competition, you need to put yourself in a position so that you have the best possible points, so that when people are ranked, they're going to obviously take the top. And that's how you'll be getting residence. It's the same process. It'll just be a little bit more competitive moving forward.
Yeah. And we just got to be careful about what we mean by best of the best, because, you know, New Zealand requires all sorts of skilled people. You don't have to be a neurosurgeon. You know, there's a huge demand in vertical infrastructure at the moment: concrete workers, formwork carpenters, steel fixers, you know, project managers, project directors. There's all sorts of works, but we can get into that a little bit later. Look, you mentioned the EOI, the expression of interest. Some people out there would have made an application under the EOI. Paul, I know that you've had some issues with people in the past who have applied for their expression of interest. It came undone a little bit on them. Can you kind of forewarn people on this webinar about that process? And, you know, and I guess there's a little bit of caution that we should be, you know, adding.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, you know, certainly if you're researching, you know, like I did before I wanted to move to New Zealand, when you go on the New Zealand immigration website, you sort of go through it and it directs you, really, it leads you to submitting an expression of interest. You know, you're thinking, well, I want residence in New Zealand. Expression of interest is the first part of getting residence in New Zealand. And I don't necessarily need to have a job offer to lodge this expression of interest. So that's what I'm going to do. And for most people, it's a complete waste of time and money, because, as Nazim's just pointed out, it just sits there. You know, there's really very little point at all in lodging an expression of interest until you've got a job offer. Because if you lodge it with a job offer attached to it, then, you know, it gets selected. So it's, you know, it's just generally a waste of time for most people. It can be a costly mistake, because you could lose the money, you know, it could expire and you get kicked out of the pool, and then you've got to do it all again. So generally, it's just one of those little rabbit holes not to really go down. The focus, if you're moving, shouldn't be on lodging an expression of interest. It should be on preparing for the move.
Yeah, look, and I think hopefully we've saved a whole lot of people a whole lot of money just from that. So Paul, you know, that is really, really good advice from a licensed immigration advisor. And I'm just going to add that point is that Paul and Nasim are licensed immigration advisors, and what that means is that they are accredited and qualified. The qualification is from IMBI, which is our Ministry of Business here in New Zealand. And so every year they have to upgrade their qualification and get it recertified. If you are using an immigration consultant wherever you are in the world, whether it's us or not, absolutely make sure that they are a licensed immigration advisor, because without that, you have no comeback, you have no insurance, you have no protection. So if you are working with a licensed immigration advisor, there's a code of conduct by which they must abide by. And you know, that is very, very strict, like a lawyer's code of conduct. And that gives you, the applicant, all sorts of protections. So that's just a warning for you all out there. Okay, so border closures, you talked about this before very, very briefly. Nasim, can you kind of give us a summary of what skills are being accepted? What have you seen over the last few months in terms of some of that loosening, and you know, what you're kind of seeing over the next 12 months, if you can sort of crystal ball that?
Sure, I'll just put my crystal ball hat and wizard hat on. So at the moment, definitely, if you are in the health sector, so, you know, registered nurses, doctors, physiotherapists, you know, all of those allied health roles as well. Those are the sorts of roles that can come in under the critical health exemption at the moment. And we've been successfully doing those since March, when the borders closed. So once you have the job offer, we lodge an expression of interest. It's outside of the normal process because applying for visas offshore is currently on hold. So we submit it through a different format. And once that's selected, we get the invitation to apply for the visa, and then the individual and their family all comes on shore and goes into managed isolation for 2 weeks. Apart from the medical professionals, we've also got what Immigration New Zealand calls the other critical workers. So other critical workers can fall into any other occupation potentially. You just have to make a slightly different submission to show why that role is critical to New Zealand. Now, Scott mentioned earlier that there's some occupations that have been sort of given more of a green light to go ahead. And a lot of those are within the infrastructure space. So if you've got a job with a company that's working on a specific project, then we'll be able to apply for an exemption on that basis. And also, in some instances, the government's decided, and they're adding to this list quite regularly, they're adding additional criteria or occupations or individuals who can qualify for that border exemption. So I think it was last week, they decided that sheep shearers are critical. So they can come into New Zealand now through this process, if they're successful, to get a visa. Prior to that, we had vets, we had fishermen, we had like film crew people. So what's happening is that, you know, as the needs increase and there's pressure on the industry here, the government goes, oh, we better pop on another occupation. And so then you can come in through that process as well. So we expect to continually get occupations added to that list. The need for skills in New Zealand is not decreasing, it's increasing. We hear it from employers every day. You know, I meet with a lot of employers as part of my work, and everyone's tearing their hair out saying, how do we get this person in? How do we get that person in? So there is going to be continual additions to those exemption lists, only because we need to keep the country going, and the government recognises that as well. Was there anything else you wanted me to add, Scott, about?
Oh, no, it's quite a good summary. I mean, just as an aside, we had, I think, about 100 people from Netflix come into the country recently. New Zealand is now seen as a really good place to do filming. I mean, obviously, we've got the Lord of the Rings and such and so forth, but Netflix is really ramping up its activity down here. So, look, I guess the creative arts, film people. We've recently brought in a band manager from the USA who we were able to prove added, you know, some economic benefit to New Zealand. We're dealing with a rather well-known rock and roll singer, rock and roll pop singer, who's coming out here. So it's very difficult to give a blanket answer on who will meet border exemptions. Every case is individual, depending on the project, as Naseem said, depending on the employer, depending on your skill set, and depending on the benefit that you bring to the country. So yeah, look, talk to us about that. But even so, I guess this is something I'd like Paul to talk about. But because there's this pent-up demand, and if you're like, let's say, a teacher, and you might not necessarily meet border exemptions now, the demand for teachers is so extreme that will eventually come. So what we're saying is get ready now. Paul, can you sort of delve into that a little bit more for people who perhaps can't actually get into New Zealand now? What should they be doing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. This really is the crux of the matter. You know, the first message is you shouldn't be sitting on your hands doing nothing, because if you are, there's a lot of people who are getting ready to move. Preparing for this move is essential. It's actually what unlocks the job offer as well, because you have to be prepared. And if you're prepared and then can prove that you're prepared, then employers are going to be more interested. So most of our clients now who are in these categories where they can't, you know, fly at the moment or get in, they're not applying for jobs online. That's the first thing you shouldn't be doing, is don't apply for jobs online. It's a waste of time, especially at the moment, you know, because the employers aren't really looking at that side of things. But what you need to be doing is getting all the information you need about New Zealand, getting what we call document and move ready. That's something that we help you do. So Naseem and the team over there can tell you exactly what documents you need and how that works. I can give you all the information you need about New Zealand because I lived there for 17 years. And then we can prove that you're ready. And that's one of the key things. If you're doing this on your own, how do you prove that you're ready? You can tell employers that you're ready. They don't even know what that means. It doesn't answer their questions. Proving that you're ready is much better when it comes from licensed immigration advisors and recruitment agents and everyone else who can say, look, this person's skilled, eligible and ready to move. And the second part of kind of getting ready for the move is putting an employment strategy together that's going to help you get those jobs. So even the people who we can't get in at the moment, the teachers and, you know, certain engineers and everything else, you know, they're researching, they're finding out about their job market in New Zealand. They're not reaching out to employers, they're not doing that because, you know, we'll be putting them forward to employers. But what they're doing is they're researching the job market. The more you know about your job market, the more chance you've got of getting a job in that market. You know, it's also making up for that lack of New Zealand experience, as they say, you know, and that's what we do. So the first stages of this is basically find out that if you're eligible. That's what we call a consultation. And everybody on here can get a free consultation with me. We'll be sending you an email and you can just get access to my calendar and schedule it in. And that gives us the information we need, and we give you the information you need. And then from there, if you do have us assist, we'll be helping you get ready, and we'll be helping you put an employment strategy together and try and get you as close to the front of that queue of people that is building every day. That queue is getting bigger and bigger every day at the moment. And when those doors do finally slowly creak open, which, you know, we're all picking will be at some point next year, hopefully in the early half of next year. And as Nazim said, occupations getting added all the time, then it is going to be a bit crazy, I think. And you need to be near the front of that queue.
Yeah, absolutely, bang on there. Yeah, so from our perspective down here in Auckland, we talk to employers all the time. That's what Working In does. Just by our name, you can tell that. So, you know, we're in daily contact, literally, with employers up and down the country. We've brought in tens of thousands of people to help employers throughout New Zealand in all sorts of industries. So we're very much on the coalface. That's how we like to see it. And we kind of understand where the demand is. Right now, obviously, health is very high demand. Health workers globally are in demand. And we're placing health workers all the time. I think Nasim's already mentioned infrastructure. So throughout the whole infrastructure environment, from the tradies all the way through to site managers, project managers, estimators, there's a lot of demand for people in the power and the renewable energy space. For example, that's the engineering, IT and ICT is, New Zealand is trying to really grow that area. And so massive demand for software developers, all sorts of people in that space. So we partner with other agencies as well who understand what we're trying to do. And if you are unique or you're not having much luck finding a job, which, as Paul's already said, is going to be very difficult from around the world, contact us first once you've spoken to Paul, and we can basically give you a heads up as to the level of demand there will be for your particular skill set. Okay. Now, one thing I haven't discussed is it's not all about the job. There are other categories, but mainly those categories are in entrepreneurialism or investment. For investment, you've got to invest 10 million New Zealand dollars, which is about £5 million sterling or 6 million US. And so there is a category there. There is a parent category. There is an entrepreneur category, which is a lower threshold, but you've basically got to start up a business and you've got to put a business case together. But by far and away, the largest category is the employment category. If you have any sort of questions around that, obviously Nasim's here, an expert in this area, and she can happily talk you through those other categories if you feel as though the skilled category is not for you, especially if you're a business owner or you've been a contractor for a long time. You might not quite fit the boxes of immigration policy. So that's where it gets a little bit, where we've got to get a bit creative, okay, which is what we do. So I guess we're going to wrap up now. I mean, this is really a short and sharp type webinar to give you a really good basis of how to go forward. Nasim, do you have any last comments to offer to people at this point in time?
I think I'd just like to reiterate how important it is to get prepared and be ready, like Paul said. Lots of times, people will come to us through other channels and say, oh, look, I'm ready to go. I just want to lodge my visa. And once we start looking through and we start working with them, we realize they're really far off the mark. And, don't feel comfortable calling their, potential employer if they've got one and saying, this is the timeline when my client now actually isn't quite as ready as they think they are. So the more prepared you can be, the easier it is for us to then push the rest of the process through. There's nothing worse than having to call an employer and say, well, actually, they're not going to arrive for like months because they haven't sorted out most of the things they actually needed to have done. So be as prepared as early as possible, because everything actually always takes a lot longer than people expect as well.
Thank you. And Paul, last comments, please.
Yeah, again, same thing. Don't sit around and wait. You know, I know we're all heading into Christmas now, and it's summer for you guys over there in New Zealand, and I'm very, very jealous. You know, the future is coming, and you know, it will arrive quicker. That one of the most difficult things in moving is trying to keep your life working, because you got to keep your job currently, you got to keep your life going currently, you got to pay your bills, you got to live your life, and at the same time you've got to try and build a life over in New Zealand. And if you're doing it on your own, that's really hard, because what happens is life gets in the way. You all know, Scott, we've seen people over the years go to events and expos, and we talk to them and we do consultations with them, and they don't commit, they don't do anything, and then we see them again a year later, or 2 years later, or 3 years later, and nothing's changed. And that's the reality. You've got to do something to make something happen. You don't have to go and spend thousands of pounds to start that ball rolling. You just have to simply get a free call with us. That could be the catalyst that starts this all going. And so we'll send everyone an email who's on here. They'll get that tomorrow or the day after, and it'll have a link in it. Schedule the call if you're serious about moving. If you're under 55 years of age, you think you've got a skill that we might need, even if you're not sure, book it in, schedule it, and we'll tell you what your options are.
Brilliant. Okay. Look, and my wrap is just a bit of advice. I don't want people, or I wouldn't be advising people to move to New Zealand because we're COVID free. I would be saying, if you're wanting a lifestyle change, if you're wanting to move to a safe country for your children or for yourself, or if you're wanting to move to a country that's not corrupt, New Zealand is the least corrupt country in the world. If you're looking to commute less and then have more of your life, if you're wanting a lifestyle where you can actually get out into the wilderness and go walking in forest and bush, or spend time at the beach, or spend more time with your children, then, you know, for me, who I've lived in the UK, I understand that New Zealand has that. And that's what most people who are coming down here are seeking. A really good balance and a reduction in stress, and a really, really lovely place to bring up kids. So, you know, that's my New Zealand pitch. I don't think I need to do too much. It's a beautiful country for anyone who's actually been online or been down here, you know that. And I guess the other thing is we're very welcoming. You know, it's a very multicultural country. It's built on multiple waves of migration from all over the world. Auckland is actually the biggest has the biggest Pacific population in the world, from Tonga, Samoa, Niue, Fiji. So very multicultural, and of course, you know, indigenous Māori population. So we welcome you. There are a lot of steps to go through. It's increasingly difficult, but the doors are still open because New Zealand is moving ahead. Our economy is growing. We do need people, and you know, and now's the time. So that's a wrap from me. I hope it's been useful. Follow the instructions. Contact Paul. That's the first step. And wish you all a good evening, or a good afternoon, or a good morning, wherever you are. So that's it from me. Thanks very much. Bye now.
Yes,